Welcome to Conversation with a Geographer. I'm Mike DeVivo, a professor of geography at Grand Rapids Community College, and today we're very fortunate to have Marie Price, professor of geography and international affairs at George Washington University. Marie, thank you so much for joining us again. It's great to have you here.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you very, very much. And I'd really like to know if you could tell us how you really got involved in geography. Were you thinking of working on maps as a child, examining landscapes? Can you tell us anything about your childhood, perhaps, and how that might have sparked any interest?
Well, I often credit my mother for becoming a geographer because she had no sense of direction. And as a child growing up in Southern California, we would be traveling someplace far from home, and she would get lost. And she'd throw me a map and say, "Get us home." So I learned early on that maps are very powerful and they can get you home. And then later in my high school years, I did take a course in geography. And back in those days, they were almost always taught by the football coach, and it was considered not necessarily the most challenging class to take. But he was a pretty good geography teacher. He took it seriously. And I had in my back of my mind there was something called geography, but then when I went to college, it wasn't there.
And you went to Reed College
I went to
first.
Reed College.
No geography there.
No geography, unfortunately. So after a couple years at Reed, I did a study abroad in Ireland. At that point, I was a psychology major, and soon to be a very unhappy psychology major. And what I learned in Ireland at Trinity College was that culture matters. I think you often learn that when you go someplace new. People see the world differently. And also physical environment really matters. And in the back of my mind, I started thinking I'd like to have a major that combines the environment and culture. At the time, Trinity did have a geography department, but when you go to European schools in the UK or Ireland, you just do one thing. That I was taking psychology classes. So as I took some time off and thought about how could I combine this interest, I was in a coffee shop in Malindi, Kenya, and just talking to other travelers. I don't even remember this person's name, but I was describing my interest. He goes, "Oh, well, you should go to UC Berkeley and study geography." Really? So at this little coffee shop, I wrote a letter to the Department of Geography at UC Berkeley and said, "I would like to study here. I want to know more about your program." So I enrolled, finished up my degree, and when I arrived, they were expecting a Kenyan. "Oh, you're not Kenyan." "No, I'm not." Anyhow, I started there and finished my degree over 30 years ago at UC Berkeley as an undergraduate in geography.
30 years ago. Was there anybody there that captivated you?
There were a lot of great professors, but the individual that I became intellectually closest to, and also my mentor, was a man named James Parsons.
One nice guy, wonderful person.
Remarkable.
Oh, yeah.
Great field worker, known for his research in Latin America, especially Colombia, but also he did work all over the American West and in California. So he, even though I think I only did one course with him, but I developed a friendship. He was always very supportive, and even when I went on to graduate school and after, we've always maintained correspondence. Actually, people back then wrote letters, not emails, and he was a great friend and colleague. And I maintained contact with his family. And in fact, one of his grandsons came and studied with us at the George Washington University.
Really?
He's now a doctoral student.
That's
at Berkeley.
amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, a great luminary in American geography for sure. Brett Wallach's obituary was just magnificent, and a great portrayal of Jim Parsons.
He had a journalistic background. He was a reporter as a young man.
Right.
And he had great curiosity and profoundly believed you needed to get out, go places, see things, talk to people. He also worked in the archives, and he used new technologies in his day, like when he was stationed in World War II in New Caledonia, he was using air photos and air photo interpretation. That was sort of a predecessor to what we do with remote sensing, and trying to determine, I guess, whatever they were doing in the Pacific where the Japanese were. But he used that then to go to Colombia and get air photos and determine that there were these raised fields all across the llanos of Colombia, which became a very strong indicator of pre-Hispanic agricultural production and large numbers of people. So even he would, his advice to me was, wherever you go, get up in an airplane, take a look. How does a place look?
Right? Erwin Royce did that. It's interesting. Not everyone would give you that advice, really.
I think it came from their direct experience. That generation, especially during World War II, first started using that technology.
Very nice person. Very kind. And apparently one that really gave his all to many students.
He treated us like an extended family. And he had his own family as well, but there were students that were always welcomed in his home.
I have a colleague in ecology whose familiarity with geography is through Parsons' work on the turtles.
Oh, of course, the green turtle and man.
Absolutely. So and so from Berkeley, you decided to go to Syracuse.
I had choices, but Syracuse offered me good support. My boyfriend, later husband at the time, was from New York, and it seemed like a good place to be for our stage of life. And in Syracuse, I had two excellent mentors, David Robinson, another Latin Americanist, who really opened up my eyes to what could be done in the archives, especially historical demography, which really got me interested in immigration and migration work. And then Donald Meinig, a historical geographer, mostly known for his work in the United States and North America, but he always taught world regional. And even though I was not his TA, I sat in on that class, and I found it mesmerizing. One of his talents, which most geographers don't do very well, is he could trace any country or region of the world on a chalkboard and do it quite accurately. And then he would add in, cities and arrows and culture groups. And as a learning skill, it's it's not easy to do, but then you would notice that students would start in their notes drawing the outlines and locating things. And today, I think we're just wed to, there's a PowerPoint slide, or you hand people a map, but actually making people draw their own maps is another level of getting them to start placing where things are and seeing those connections.
It facilitates the retention of the subject matter. There's some recent research that examines this matter of note-taking. It's interesting, and yes, Meinig, what a brilliant orator, really.
Great speaker, and he really embraced this, what he taught. I think it was world cultures, but he knew a lot about the world, and I think that helped inform him inform his understanding of the United States, and he traveled a lot. He's both of Robinson and Meinig are still alive, and Meinig retired, but Robinson's still active. So at Syracuse, I deepened my understanding of Latin America and was able to get funding to do field research in Latin America.
And you conducted field work in Colombia.
Venezuela and Colombia, but mostly Venezuela. I wanted to go to Colombia, again, probably Jim Parsons' influence, but Colombia in the late 80s was not a safe place to go. And I received a federal grant through the Department of Education, and they did not want to send a young American woman to do field research in Colombia at the time. Venezuela's right next door, though, and they had no problem with Venezuela, and so off I went.
You know, it's interesting because it appears to me that if I reflect back on the 80s and even the 90s, well, and today too, there really is a dearth of those people in geography that have devoted themselves to field work like you have and a few others. Were there many others at Syracuse, fellow graduate students, that became deeply embroiled in field work?
Yes, I would say I had that modeled as an undergraduate because nearly all the graduate students I knew at Berkeley and were doing field work. They even had field courses for undergraduates. There was an urban field course and a physical field course. But at Syracuse, I would say anyone working in Latin America was doing field work. But no, even the North American scholars, getting into the archives, talking. So it was very clear part of both places' ethos, that you would have to engage places and people and landscape. And also the historical dimensions were very important too, that you had to think about a place through time, not just a thin slice of whatever years you were looking at a place, but trying to go back into the archives or talk with people and get a better understanding of how this place has changed through time.
It's amazing. Your career so far has really been magnificent in so many ways. I mean, you're welcome, but you're in Kenya and you decide to go to Berkeley, and it's interesting how these fortuitous circumstances tend to shape the path that you have followed, and so much of your work is associated with conducting field studies. You've done a lot in immigration and migration. Would you comment on how conducting field work vis-a-vis immigration is an imperative? Of course, it requires the archival work as well and data analysis.
Right. So I got into immigration, actually my dissertation was looking at historical movements between Colombia and Venezuela tied to coffee production. And I was able to extract that data for working with the archives. And I wasn't really, I was in the field talking with people, but a lot of the movement I was interested were people that were long gone. But immigration and why do people move and what happens when people cross borders was long been the broad narrative that's interested me. So working in Latin America, and having the chance to go to other countries like Peru and Bolivia, it became clear that especially in the late 80s, early 90s, a lot of people were leaving. And at the same time, I was living in a place, Washington, D.C., that was suddenly becoming a major immigrant destination. In the 90s, immigration really took off there. And so I had this interesting, where I was in my life, I had young children. I thought, I want to do field work. I can go to places like Bolivia for maybe 2-3 weeks a year, but I have a lot of field work opportunities in my own backyard, so to speak. And it allowed me to become more deeply involved in my community. I think local field work is extremely important. And because of the language skills I had in background, I could connect with people whose experiences and voices were not always being heard. So especially when you're dealing with a population of, say, undocumented people, what we know about that population is only more whatever people want to say in newspapers. You hear testimonials, but unless you actually try to work with different community organizations and talk with people, or do the transnational side of it, do field work where people are coming from and see about how these linkages are formed and what it means for sending countries, that's just the only way you're going to get at that story. And it's an important story because there are millions of people moving
and
every year.
it's time consuming. It is not something that can be conquered in a few months, or even sometimes not even a few years.
And it's changing all the time. So the scale, I think one of the important lessons I've taken from working with a theme like migration is that this sort of telescoping of scale is so important. You really have to understand what's happening locally, but you have to scale up to see how states or other jurisdictions are influencing migration movements. But then you have to really get that 30,000-foot view, kind of a global perspective. What are the big patterns and trends, and sort of going between these different scales helps me inform all of the other scales on the way. So in looking at local places and how they're changing, I became interested in the question of, well, where are the big immigrant destinations in the world? Where are people going? And suddenly I found myself knowing about places like Singapore and Dubai and even Moscow. And my colleague Lisa Bentishort and I did a book on global immigrant cities, and spent a lot of time actually working in the Library of Congress. Has a great international census archive. Not the Library of Congress, the Census Bureau has an international library of censuses, which is a great underutilized resource. So we were able to go and sometimes get people with language expertise to try and ferret out information from the various censuses. And began to construct that map, though it's a very dynamic map. But so looking at immigration on this global urban scale down to very small communities in Bolivia has really ignited my geographic imagination.
Well, I can imagine you're able to connect the dots and attempt to really gain a thorough understanding of the intricate nature of this very complex phenomenon, very complex, that policymakers, students, and colleagues in other disciplines fail to realize all too often. You talked about your book on immigrants in various urban parts of the world. Would you care to comment on your work in the World Regional Geography text that we use here at Grand Rapids Community College?
Well, that was another fortuitous opportunity, I guess. Early on, when I started teaching at GW, I had done work on Venezuela, and I was presenting a paper at a meeting in San Diego about the region and regional concepts and how geographers use them, and maybe sometimes abuse them or neglect them, but they're very dynamic and they're useful containers. And a man named Les Roundtree heard that talk and then approached me and said, "Hey, would you ever want to write a world regional geography book?" And I said, well, I never really thought about it. I sat in on world regional courses. I had taught one, and I wasn't thrilled with the products that were out there. So I said, well, I'll think about it. And then my good colleague at the time, Martin Lewis, we were had taught for several years at George Washington. He's now at Stanford. I said, well, if I was going to do this, I'd have to do this with Martin, because he's just knows everything about everywhere. He's a great colleague. And then we got a fourth person in Bill Wyckoff, who was a Syracuse person, but we didn't overlap. I think he left just as I came in. So we began this adventure of writing a world regional book from scratch. We started out with a map of the world. We began in '95, so this idea of the Cold War had ended, new alliances, a new geopolitical map was forming. How are we going to shape it? Where do we put certain countries? And we have kind of some border countries that have moved back and forth. But we have worked together for 20 years on that. Right, the first book came out in '99. We're working on our, I believe, 11th book right now. I mean, we do two versions, a thick one and a thin one. And it's been a very rewarding collaboration. We live far away from each other, but we get together probably once a year, and then, of course, with the internet and PDF files, we do a lot of exchanging. But again, working on that scale, trying to paint those broad strokes of what are the big things that people should know about the world. Mm-hmm. And we definitely, early on, saw that an anchoring concept was globalization. In the '90s, everyone was talking about it, and it was somewhat controversial. Mm-hmm. Now everyone's almost accepted, yes, we're in a globalized era. And then, and yet as geographers, we knew that this vision of the world as McWorld, we were all becoming alike, was wrong. All you need to do is get in an airplane and get off somewhere. Mm-hmm. Yes, you can see similarities, but there's a lot of diversity. So working with those two titles, we came up with the title Diversity Amid Globalization, to see what are the larger forces of technology and capitalism and increased trade and interconnectivity, and yet at the same time, really important local differences in how people respond to these changes. So that's a project that keeps you, following world events, trying to make sense of them. We're always, every summer I seem to be doing some revision or another. But it's been a very rewarding project. And the other thing that project sparked in me was my first long-term collaboration. Mm-hmm. So we are an author team that have worked together for almost 20 years. We have a tremendous respect for each other. We're able to critique each other fairly and openly, and it's been really rewarding. I didn't get, as a graduate student or undergraduate, you're supposed to do work on your own, and I didn't really understand the value of collaboration. Mm-hmm. And maybe as a student you're supposed to work on your own, but collaboration is incredibly important, and especially if you're tackling, doing a textbook, it would just be too exhausting to do all those volumes on your own, although there are people that have. But if you're tackling a big issue, say like immigration, mm-hmm. you need to work with others, whether you're working with in my case, other migrants or other scholars who bring different perspectives, because, we each have our own purchase on how.
Well, have you divided the duties thematically or regionally or both?
Mostly regionally. Mm-hmm. Someone will take charge of a chapter, but we've moved those chapters around sometimes because it allows for freshening up, new eye. But the structure we sort of worked out among ourselves. How were we going to organize each chapter with, obviously some room for variation. But usually one author will take the role of a certain region. I've pretty consistently done the Latin American and Caribbean chapters and Sub-Saharan Africa. But, this latest round, we've kind of moved things around again. Mm-hmm. So it's good.
Those are good chapters. They're all good chapters, really. I adopted the book. I remember it was the only book I ever adopted in the middle of the academic year, because I think it came out in November or something like that, which was not a good time. But I was convinced by your editor Dan
Caveney, he was
nice guy.
Great editor.
that I should take a look at it. And I did. And I really enjoyed the maps, and I said, okay, I'm changing.
Yeah, we've been working on those maps. There are a lot of them, and we keep changing them and updating. Yeah, two areas, regions of the world we decided to include that aren't in other books usually one was Central Asia, and that was the response to major geopolitical changes, and all of a sudden, and it turns out it was a good thing. Now many more people talk about Central Asia. In 1999, when we said Central Asia, people looked at us like, where would that be exactly? And then pulling out the Caribbean as a distinct region. Usually it gets lost in the larger Latin American story, but there's certain aspects of it that lend itself extremely well to the concepts of both diversity and globalization. So, I think, there's not one way to divide up the world. There's certain consistencies that happen over and over again, but being mindful of the fact that regions change. I mean, look how much Europe has changed and how we think about Europe.
Absolutely.
And you could probably say that about a lot of other countries in the region, in the world as well.
Indeed. I mean, I think of sub-Saharan Africa, for example, as well, right? Here you have produced a book with a team of collaborators that's used across the country, perhaps other parts of the world, I assume other parts of the world, and there are students that are getting the message. What advice might you have for students that are studying geography? Because I'll tell you, I had a student that was converted to geography because of reading parts of your text.
Well, that's nice to hear. It is a project where we feel we've reached a lot of people. A lot of times I think people sign up for a geography class. Well, my students tell me because A, I don't know anything about the world and I think I better learn. B, I think this is going to be an easy class, and usually they're disappointed with that. Or C, they say, I love geography. And I hear more and more. I can't help but think that's part of the growth of AP Human Geography, and that there's more and more. One of my colleagues works on that exam, and something like 160,000 high school students took the AP exam last year. Which
it's a lot of students.
It's a lot of students.
And it's not one of the traditional exams either.
It's only been around for
years?
maybe a little more than that, more like 15, but it has steadily grown. So there is actually students do arrive at university now with the at least understanding that there's a subject called geography, and that's a big change. So my advice to students, if they want to carry on in geography, I mean, World Regional is often a gateway course. It opens up the major. And the nice thing about World Regional, it also gives you a sort of taste for physical geography and then human geography. Usually not so much of the techniques, but you're able to see how, say, mapping and satellite imagery can be used. But I would say for students who want to carry on, there are a lot of opportunities for geographers. The obvious one is learning techniques, especially being able to use GIS software, and open source software is a big change now, satellite imagery. But then, developing a thematic area that you're interested in, whether it's, say, conservation or immigration or transportation, those techniques and a real thematic understanding. And then if there's a region of the world that you really want to learn about, that's certainly can open up doors for you, because we need people with regional expertise, because the world is not all the same.
And you are on the Faculty of International Affairs as well as Geography. That is a rarity, really, in our discipline. I mean, it doesn't happen too often for for a faculty member in any institution to have a dual appointment of sorts. How did that evolve?
I guess it's really peculiar to our university. And at the George Washington University, where I've taught for 25 years, the Elliott School of International Affairs, every faculty member there is affiliated with some other disciplinary department, typically political science, economics, history, geography, anthropology. But at the same time, faculty in these other departments can have a courtesy appointment in international affairs. And early on, I was asked to, because of my involvement in Latin America, to be involved in their Latin American Studies program. I directed that for a while. So by my third or fourth year at GW, I was a dual appointment with geography and international affairs. And the international affairs program is excellent. Certainly, it attracts students from all over the world. There's a strong interest in lots of different world regions, but with Latin America is an older and established program at the Elliott School. And I guess it also allows me to engage with colleagues in political science, economics, history, that all have their own take on world regions. There's a lot of events and speakers. And the other nice thing as a geographer, international affairs programs tend to be more applied, and they are interested in policy and tend to bring in people that work in government. And so I don't think when I was an undergraduate or a graduate student, if I gave a talk, the first question would not be, what is the policy implications of your work? But very quickly, at the Elliott School and in Washington in general, I learned that that's going to be one of the first questions someone would ask, because in a city like Washington, people are so interested in policy. So they want information. They want, there's this concern for, gathering data, coming up with conclusions. But they also want to know, now that you've gotten that far, what would you recommend? How could you make things better? So that has led me to do more policy-related work.
That's interesting. We talk about answering the so what question really so often, and oftentimes we fail to answer it adequately. And so it's really a fascinating blend of academic pursuit, your academic pursuit, and then it's pragmatic implementation. We just have a few minutes left, and I'd like to talk briefly about your work with the Healthy Departments Initiative of the Association of American Geographers. We're in difficult times in academe today, according to some people, and there are geography programs that are facing some difficulties, hardships in reference to their survival. Do you have any words of wisdom you can share to department chairs or faculty in departments concerning how they might strengthen their stance, how they might strengthen their positions as geographers, really an esoteric discipline in many places,
Right.
but as geographers that should maintain a department, whether it's in a state public school or a private liberal arts college or wherever?
My sense is that geography as a discipline is holding its own. There was a time in the 80s where departments were definitely closing, and a few have opened, but they're always, when people are thinking about cutting departments, geography is often one of those ones that would be considered. So I'm answering this as someone who's been a chair for many years. I'm not a chair right now, and worked in healthy departments, and actually had been through the experience of a dean calling me in and say, if we got rid of geography, where would you like to go in the university? And my response was, I wouldn't stay. I'm a geographer and I need to be in a geography department. So first of all, you have to communicate what you do and how you do it to the higher ups. because there are administrators that might remember, oh, aren't geography departments closing? And you'll have to tell them things like, well, 160,000 high school students took AP Human Geography. That's an important indicator of interest. Secondly, departments really need to get a breadth of courses, and that's always hard when you're a few faculty, but some core techniques courses need to be there, core human and core physical. And since there's so much interest in the environment these days, having an important, being part of that discussion in geography is critical. Thirdly, if you can get your students involved and engaged. So one of our really exciting developments is our department's students, undergrads and a couple graduate students, have created a humanitarian mapping society. And we partner with the Red Cross and the State Department and do crisis mapping, which is, for example, when Haiyan struck the Philippines, we had a bunch of students using satellite imagery and open source platforms, so the data are available to anybody. We're mapping structures and damaged buildings and roads and fields. We've done collaborative projects on Zimbabwe, where else? Colombia, Bangladesh. In a couple of weeks, we're going to have a map off against George Mason University as students see who they can map the most features.
The two Georges.
The two Georges. So why does this matter? Well, first of all, it shows that geography is relevant. It's providing a service, you're engaging the world and engaging organizations. And then if you have events like this, we call them mapathons. And if anyone's interested in mapathons, I'd be happy to talk to them about it. Becomes this sort of great community building. We'll have a Friday night mapathon and there'll be 100 geographers with their laptops mapping. And of course you invite administrators and show them that, hey, we're not your parents' geography, we're something new. So there are so many opportunities. And then the last point I make, going back to fieldwork, is that there is a danger of us all being glued to our screens. You walk from whether you're in front of a screen in your office to your little iPhone or iPad or something in front of you. Any project that gets students out in the world, whether it's in a neighborhood or a farm or going overseas and talking with people, collaborating. I had a really exciting project with Patricia Solis where we did this collaborative research in Panama City with geographers from the US and Panama. That changes people's lives. It makes the world from abstract to real. And geography is eminently practical. Sometimes I'm afraid so many geographers have forgotten that. Engaging the world, doing real things, trying to make life better or bring issues before people that might not fully appreciate them. If you do that, geography will be just fine.
Well, we're very blessed to be geographers, that's for sure, because I cannot think of anything that is more fascinating than geography. It's indeed a way of life.
Right. As my friend Mike DeVivo likes to say, geography lives.
Amen. Thank you so much for your time, Marie. This concludes our session of conversation with the geographer.
Thank you.
Thank you.